is what we're doing next. This is deductive reasoning. Remember yesterday we talked about inductive. Give it back, Connor. Inductive reasoning. He has your pencil pouch. Give it back. And I am supposed to be a snitch. It's my job. Anyway, deductive reasoning, okay, is slightly different in that inductive reasoning was we see a pattern and we make a conclusion from that pattern. Deductive reasoning is reasoning logically from a given statement. So this is true. We know this is true. Okay, how do I get from that statement to the conclusion that I'm going to make? Okay, so this is deductive reasoning. There are two laws that we're going to talk about today. The first one is the law of detachment. And they detach. So the law of detachment says this: if a conditional is true, I love it. If a conditional is true and its hypothesis, that's a Y, sorry, its hypothesis is true, okay, then we can conclude the conclusion is true.
Whoa.
Okay? So here it is. If a conditional is true, so if the if-then statement, Justin, is true, I know, mind blown.
Is that true?
Yes. And its hypothesis. What is the hypothesis? What comes after the if portion, right? The first part. If the conditional is true and they tell us the first part is true, then we're going to conclude the conclusion is true. Here's what I mean. Here's a simpler way to say it, first of all. So if I can say if P then Q is true and P is true, then you're going to conclude Q is true. Okay? Here's your example. If a student gets an A on a final exam, then the student will pass the course. Okay, so for some class, they're saying it is true that if you get an A on the final, you can't fail the course. I don't know that that's true for mine. I've never seen it happen, actually. Well, yeah. And we say, Susie got an A on her history final. Okay? So here's this is example 1. Let's write it out. If a student gets an A on the final, then they pass the class.
Well, I mean, if they get an A, they're probably a student.
That's what I was saying. Okay, so we're saying that is a true statement for whatever class it is we're talking about for world history. Okay, that is true. The next statement they give us is Susie got an A. Yeah, you don't like that? Okay, Susie got an A on her final. The question is, what do you conclude from that?
That she passed the class.
Susie passed the class, okay? So this is what you're going to be given. Your answer is Susie passed the class. Okay? But now think of it this way. What if I said, if a student gets an A on their final, then they pass the class, and I tell you, Susie passed world history. What do you conclude?
She got an A. No, you can't.
No, because she could have got a B and passed, right? She could have got a C and still passed the class. Your conclusion for that is it's not possible to make a conclusion. Okay? So here's how it works. If I get, if P then Q is true, and I tell you Q is true. Okay, so if I tell you the conclusion is true, you have to say not possible. Because just because the conclusion is true does not mean that the first part had to be true, right? Like if I said, if I wear glasses, then I'll see better. And I said, I saw way better today. You can't conclude I wore glasses, because what if I wore contacts, right? So the conclusion, what if you wore them upside down? The conclusion cannot be the thing that's given as true in order for you to make the hypothesis true. It has to go hypothesis, conclusion is true. Hypothesis is true. You can say conclusion is true. Okay? So just be really careful with that. And if you think about it, like, does this make sense? You should be able to get there without even remembering this law of detachment. Okay? If it doesn't make sense, it's not going to work. How about this? If you have a license, then you can drive a car. Okay? That's your conditional. If you have a license, then you can drive a car legally. Legally. Yeah, let's reword that. If you have a license, then you can legally drive a car. And I say, George drove to the store.
If he drove his skateboard.
What if he had a permit?
What if he drove a
What if
go-kart?
he drove a dirt bike?
Is it possible to say George got his license?
No.
No. You need to say not. Okay. Is it absolute that George got his license? No. He might have his permit. He might have driven illegally, right? So it has to go conditional is true, hypothesis is true. You can then conclude conclusion is true. Okay? Has to go in that order. You cannot do the reverse. Okay, so that is the law of detachment. The second law,
How many laws are we learning?
2, is the law of syllogism. It's a fun word, right? And the law of syllogism is pretty simple, in my opinion. I feel like this one gets mixed up far less than the other one. Okay? Law of syllogism says this. If I know if P then Q is true, and I know if Q then R is true. Okay? If I know those two statements are true, then what I can do is I can take out the two in the middle that are the same. As long as one is a hypothesis and one is a conclusion, I can take them out and make the conclusion if P, then R. Right? So we'll just do this example. Here's what we mean. Let's say I tell you if a figure is a square, then it's a rectangle. Is that a true statement? Yes, if a figure is a square, then it's a rectangle. That is true. Then I tell you if a figure is a rectangle, then it has 4 sides. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yes, if a figure is a rectangle, it has to have 4 sides, okay? So what I'm saying is I can take out the two that are identical. The figure is a rectangle, the figure is a rectangle, right? I'm going to get rid of those. And the conditional statement I'm left with is my conclusion. So I can say right now, if a figure is a square, then it has 4 sides. If a figure is a square, then it has 4 sides. Okay, so this is your answer. You're taking out the two identical ones and you're writing what's left. Okay? Not quite. Okay, so what do you do with this one? If you do gymnastics, then you are flexible. And if you do ballet, then you are flexible. What conclusion do you make?
Nothing. It's
You
not possible.
can't, right? Because think about this. If we take out the two that are the same, then you are flexible, then you are flexible. Can you make a conditional statement from that? If you do gymnastics, if you do ballet, doesn't make sense, right? So you say not possible.
What did you say if you do gymnastics
You're not simplifying your statement at all, right? The whole point is to simplify the statement. So if we did that, it's true, but it doesn't simplify what we were saying. Okay? Okay, how about this? Oops, sorry about that. If a whole number is divisible by 10, then it's divisible by 5. True statement? Mm-hmm. If a whole number is divisible by 10, then it's divisible by 5. And then I say if a whole number ends in 0, then it's divisible by 10. Okay, so those are my two statements. I'm looking for, is there a hypothesis and a conclusion that are identical? That are saying the same thing? If a whole number is divisible by 10, then it's divisible by 5. If a whole number ends in 0, then it's divisible by 10. Is there something that's the same?
Yeah, 10.
The 10, right? So if I take out, if a whole number is divisible by 10, then a whole number is divisible by 10, right? If I take those out, what's my conclusion? Right, so you have to rearrange a little bit, right? Because we want our hypothesis to stay a hypothesis, we want our conclusion to stay a conclusion. We would say if a whole number ends in 0, then it's divisible by 5. Okay, so this is your answer. Take out the hypothesis and conclusion that are the same, and you should be left with a hypothesis and conclusion that make a true statement. Questions? What? It is. I have one more for you, but it's all of this last one is a combination of those two. Okay? Last one. So this is example 3. Let's say if you live in Cerritos, that wouldn't be true. Then you live in California. Okay? Then we say if you live, we're pretending there is no other Cerritos, by the way. There probably is somewhere, but we're pretending there's not. If you live in California, then you live in the U.S. Okay, so those two statements so far. And then the third statement is James lives in Cerritos. Okay, I want to know, based on those three statements, what conclusion could you make?
James lives in Cerritos, so he lives in the
He lives in the U.S.
He lives in California.
In the U.S.
Oh. Okay, so here's the deal. You have law of syllogism going on, and you have law of detachment going on. You have to start with syllogism so you can go to detachment, okay? So law of syllogism would be using these top two, okay? If you live in Cerritos, you live in California. If you live in California, then you live in the U.S. What's your new statement from that? Right, take out the California. Okay, so now we're saying if you live in Cerritos, then you live in the US. And I'm saying James lives in Cerritos. So you conclude James lives in the US. Okay. Any questions on that? So make sure to do syllogism first. Take out the two that are identical, and then you can do the law of detachment from that. All right.